December 3rd, 2019, just to make, we should have a timestamp on this.
Thinking just about my grandfather McMorris. It always amazes me, but it was true of not only him, how much more they traveled than we think they did. I mean, they took train trips to the West Coast, and
Really?
he did, and it was related to the church.
Oh, okay.
United Presbyterian Church at one time separated from the Presbyterian Church back in about the 1840s, and it was mostly centered in the east around Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and Ohio, and New York. But for some reason or other, there was a big group of them in the state of Washington. And every third or fourth year, they'd have a conference. A lot of them they had in Silver Bay when they came east, but every once in a while they would go to the state of Washington. And the young married people and teenagers both religiously, using the word, attended these conferences.
Sure.
And my grandfather McMorris was a member of the East Greenwich Church. I'm not sure what age he was out of high school. I would say probably in early 20s, maybe. Took the train to the state of Washington to attend the United Presbyterian Conference. And while there, he heard about a boat trip to Alaska, and he says, "While I'm here, I might just well go to Alaska too."
No kidding.
So he took the boat up the inland to Alaska before he came home.
Right.
Wow.
Now the rest of the story here.
So this is your grandfather?
Yep, my grandfather.
Which is James Houston.
James Houston.
Okay.
And that's how he met my grandmother.
Ah.
She was from New Wilmington, right outside of Pittsburgh. And at some church conference, they probably had one in Pittsburgh, but I don't know what one it was, but he met her. That's how he met the girl from Pennsylvania.
Well, that's it, yeah.
And that was Anna McGeoch?
No,
Who was that?
that was, no, because Anna was, you're going, well,
Yeah, her name was Kegerice, my grandmother's.
yeah.
Okay.
That one?
Well, show them the other one here, because see, this is Anna McGeoch,
Oh, okay.
and that is James Thomas, in right here, and that's the same. If you look at this picture, see right here,
Right.
That was two.
there's James Thomas right
Yep.
there.
Oh, okay.
So that would be
Yep.
our great grandfather, I think.
Okay.
And this is my grandfather here, and I think this guy is your grandfather.
Yeah, that's my grandfather.
Okay.
And
See, I wouldn't put the names at the bottom so I wouldn't miss them. Now, that was the other question I had for you. Does that look accurate? Because this is what Norma was telling me, but I'm not sure if...
Thomas Hebert McMorris. That was named after his father. Whatever happened to him?
I'm not sure. That's one thing. I was talking to Dolores one day, a little while back, and she said that she was going to try to do something about the McMorris history, because she'd been threatening to do it for a long time. There is, I have...
Well, see, I mean,
Yep.
this is Thomas McMorris.
Right.
They're identical names. This is Thomas,
Well, it's James Thomas.
James Thomas, when they called him Thomas.
Oh, did they?
Yeah. And this is Thomas Hebert McMorris.
Right.
His son, obviously.
Well, that's a lot of...
But he didn't live around here, I don't believe, because
I think he moved out west.
he must have.
Because where the heck was I? I was just reading a whole bunch of stuff about that. Because it was, anyway, let me get to my list here before I forget. So does that look accurate, though,
Oh, yeah.
as far as the identification? So that's a picture of our great-grandfathers and their brothers and sisters, or their kids, I should say. I had never heard that name. Carthage, you said, or the
Kegerice.
Kegerice. That's what it was.
That was my grandmother that lived in Pennsylvania.
Okay.
That's her
So
right
that was
there.
her maiden name.
Yeah.
What's the origin of that name? Scottish? Irish?
German.
German?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Pennsylvania Dutch, but they were Germans.
That would make sense, yeah.
Yeah. And there's a big family of them. And I visited them out there. And her nephew, she had, I haven't got this right, but I know she has 3 brothers and 2 sisters. And lived in Newcastle, about 30 miles from Pittsburgh. Was you would think to visit with her, and as I knew her, my grandmother, you would think she was a learned, maybe college graduate. But what happened was, she grew, I'm not sure she graduated from high school, but what she did do, she, as a young girl, maybe 14 or 15, went to work for wealthy people from Pittsburgh. Mm-hmm. They lived in Newcastle and New Wilmington, the wealthy steelworker people and so forth.
Right.
And it rubbed off. She learned dressmaking and all the fineries of wealthy people, and she absorbed it and acted it out in her life. What you might say, more class than she really was. But she was an accomplished public speaker.
Wow.
She was head of the WCTU. She was very involved.
What is that? The WC, the women's what?
Women's Christian Temperance Union.
Oh, okay. All right. Interesting. Okay.
And because her first 10 years of her life, I think 8 or 10 years, was spent in wealthy families' homes with their children and so on and so forth. And she was a very accomplished, in a lot of the dressmaking styles and sophistication of rich families.
Huh.
Okay.
Interesting.
So again, and you're talking about what was her name again?
Elizabeth.
Elizabeth. Now, which one
Elizabeth Kegerice.
Okay.
She didn't. Yeah, she's right there.
And she married.
James Houston McMorris.
Oh, so okay, I got now I put it together. All right. You kind of went off, and I missed the first part of that.
Yeah.
So she was your grandmother. Yeah. Okay. So you answered the first question I had. Well, the first two. One was about identifying the people, and then the second one was how did your no, that was your grandparents. How did your mother and father meet?
Well, they only lived a mile apart.
Okay. Well, okay. So where did your mother live growing up?
All right, my mother. Now we go to the East Greenwich. They lived in East Greenwich.
Okay.
My grandfather, right out of high school, he was born over on the farm over here about a mile away, but he moved to East Greenwich because the church had a farm.
You're talking about your grandfather, so.
My grandfather.
Where was your grandfather born?
He was born on the farm over here in down to Jackson.
What farm would that be today?
Carney's own it, where the new house just built.
Okay.
Just built.
That because my father again had told me I think he lived at one pine.
That's where Tom.
He lived there at one
That's where all the boys grew up.
Okay.
That was where Thomas, and I'm not sure whether it was a generation before Thomas or not.
Okay.
But at least I know Thomas lived there.
So that was owned by the McMorrises, probably, or were they renting? You think, or
They owned it.
They owned it. Okay. All right.
Yeah. And of course, there was a bunch of boys, and so as soon as they got old enough, they looked for other work.
Yeah.
The church in East Greenwich had its own farm. come across the bridge, heading towards Salem on the left-hand side. Jay Skelly now owns the land. But there was a house, and up on the hill was a house was down by Route 29, and up behind it was a little barn, couple little barns, probably 4 or 5 cows.
So is that on Black Creek Road, you mean? You're talking about on Black Creek Road, that was that
No, right on 29.
Right on 29.
Yeah.
Okay,
Just-
so which way, if we're by the bridge that
Come
in East Greenwich there, and
turn
we're
on
looking at
29 towards Salem,
and we're looking at Salem, you're going to Salem. Okay, which way are we talking then?
and 50 yards up the road on the left.
Okay, where it goes up by
Right
the old
there,
schoolhouse there, I guess it is.
No house there at all now.
Okay, but there used to be a
Empty
this
lot.
old
Just a
schoolhouse.
driveway up there.
Okay,
Yeah, and the farm was behind, up on the flats behind the hill.
okay.
Now, so he went to work on that little farm,
And we're still talking about your grandfather.
and he got married, and he and his wife lived there. Adding to running the little farm for a church, which is not a big deal. Across the road between 29 and the river, and right beyond the first house on, you come across the bridge, and,
Yeah.
and the vacant lot there,
Yeah.
was a feed store that made feed for horses and cows and so forth. Also had a stationary hay press where farmers would bring in their excess hay, more than they needed for their own use. It was a stationary hay press that came in on the road level, and as it drops off towards the river, the press was up down the hill. This my grandfather told me about, so that's why I'm telling you. I never saw it.
Yeah.
They'd unload their hay and put it into this hay press, and had a big screw and a plate that went on top of it, and ended up making a bale of about 200 or 300 pounds. Pressing it down.
Mm-hmm.
They'd get it as hard as they could, and then they'd tie binding twine of some kind around it, and take it across the river and send it the railroad to Albany. And really did quite a lot of business, particularly in the spring of the year.
Now, what was it used for when it got to Albany?
Feed horses in
Oh, so
Albany.
it just was compacted
Yeah.
that way. Oh,
Yeah.
so it's easier to ship it that way.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So that was his business. He lived on the little farm and milked a few cows, and ran the feed store. And one of the byproducts of the feed store was baling hay and shipping it to Albany.
Huh.
Now, they got married in 1897. My mother was born in 1900.
Okay.
Miller was born in 1905. Jim was born in 1910. And my mother and Miller started school, that schoolhouse in East Greenwich.
Yep.
They moved back to the farm up here, and I don't know the circumstances, whether their father died or retired or what happened. I don't know that. But they moved back to the farm anyways in 1912. My mother was 12 years old. And she and Miller went to the little schoolhouse up here. And Jimmy wasn't old enough to go to school yet.
So that's the one. That's that building that's still up here on the corner.
Maxwell's Corner.
Maxwell's corner.
Yeah.
Okay.
Before I forget, now what did your grandfather do for a living? Was he a farmer over here?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and he went full-time farmer then.
Yeah. Milk cows and.
Had a herd of,
Well, I mean, and then our great grandfather, who was obviously the clan was there.
Yeah.
He was the farmer too,
Yeah.
must be, right? So, okay.
And I remember my grandfather had 10 or 12 cows.
Yeah.
Milk cows. I don't know whether he had them from his father or what, but I knew that. And so Mother and Miller went to the little grade school up here when she ready to go to high school. She went to Battenville and got on the train, went to Greenwich
Oh, yeah.
High School.
Yeah.
Miller being 5 years younger, I can't tell you that I know whether he went to Greenwich School or not. Jimmy
Yeah.
went to Cambridge, never went to Greenwich School.
He went to Cambridge.
But Jimmy went to Cambridge and played football in Cambridge, a very famous football team.
Yeah.
I don't know about Miller. I assume he went to Cambridge too, but I don't know that.
Mm-hmm.
But Jimmy went to Cambridge to school, and that was a time different than today. Football was always a big thing in Cambridge. Why, I'm not sure. They recruited football players. Bill Robertson, Casiuna, went to Cambridge and played football. He went to Greenwich one year, and he was so good that Cambridge decided they didn't want him, and
Really?
so he and Jimmy went together to Cambridge. That's how they got to school. They took turns driving. And Cambridge had a tremendous football team, and Johnny Galloway went to Colgate and became an All-American football player at Colgate. Jimmy and Harry McGeoch and Bill Robertson went to Morrisville, played football in Morrisville. But in high school, they didn't have leagues. They arranged their own schedules.
Right.
They were so good that they beat everybody, including Saratoga, Troy, and Hudson Falls and Glens Falls. Big scores. Played for the Eastern New York State Championship at Union College against Albany High School. They got down there and they didn't have enough uniforms of all the same color. So Union used some of Union College's football players' uniforms, and they beat Albany, I think, 46-6.
Wow.
And one of the McQuarter boys was a star player with them too.
Okay.
But Jim was a guard. When I went to Morrisville 10 years later, I learned more about him playing at Morrisville. The coach told me, and it was hard for me to believe it, but he says he played every minute of every game. Of course, they played both ways. He didn't have an offensive team and a defensive team.
Right.
He played every minute of every game the whole year.
Oh, jeez.
Never sat on the bench.
Wow.
He wasn't big, but he was pretty good in size in those days. Probably weighed 175 pounds. So anyways, that's my story of my grandfather, and they moved back to the farm, and he farmed it the rest of his life there.
So then your mother's up here, up in Jackson, so where was your father? Here?
My father?
Yeah.
Yeah. My grandparents, McGuire,
Yeah.
talking about. My grandfather grew up on the farm over on the Shushan Road just now, where they had to raise, well, up until recently, raised sheep. 5 Corners Farm, they called it.
Okay.
Right below Neil Adams.
Yep. Yep.
That's where he grew up. And my grandmother lived in Casiuna. They were married, and he went to work in the Walloomsac paper mill. And there was an advertisement on the bulletin board for Eastern farm boys to run farms in Illinois of absentee owners, businessmen in Illinois that own farms.
Right.
And so he and another couple, just married, moved out to run 2 farms in Illinois. in 1885. And the other couple didn't stay only a year, so my grandfather, McGuire, ended up running both farms. And apparently very successful. They stayed there 10 years. I don't know the arrangements, but I think they were pretty much on shares. They had a tornado that went pretty close by, and my grandmother told me about tornado putting straws through the boards in the side of the barn. And plus she was pretty homesick, so she told my grandfather that he could stay if he wanted to, but she was going back to Washington County. And she had my aunt and uncle were born out there, and they took, he had an auction, and they took the train with 2 or 3 cows and a team of horses and a few implements. And my grandmother, all of them in one train. 4 days took them back to Washington County. And they bought this place here. I'm just leading up to what you asked me.
Yeah.
In 1895. And my father was born here. His brother and sister were born in Illinois, but he was born here. And so he went to school up at the district school up here, and
Now, district school.
maybe met my mother then,
You
although
mean, you're talking about Salem being district school?
he went to Salem to high school.
Okay.
But
it was over here.
Yeah, but he
By
went
Maxwell.
to
Yeah.
grade school up here. I've got a picture of him in grade school, and my mother isn't in it, so it was apparently taken before she moved up from East Greenwich.
Right.
So that's how they met. They were just neighbors.
In school and neighbors, and yeah, that's pretty close. All right, so did they both go to Salem to high school? And
He went to Salem High School,
did she go?
and she went to Greenwich.
She went to Greenwich. Okay. Yeah.
He was 2 years older. He's born in '98, and she was born in 1900.
Do you ever? So you remember your grandfather then, James?
Oh yeah.
All right.
Very well. I was.
So he
14.
he was over here at the farm over here.
I was 14 when he died.
Okay.
2 things I remember very much about him was that he was supervisor in Washington County,
Oh.
on the Board of Supervisors. And it was at the time that they had the centennial 100-year of the Battle of Saratoga. And they had a reenactment of the Battle of Saratoga on the battlefield over there.
Yeah.
And he took me over,
Oh.
and my father and mother. And I remember they had a huge, built a platform maybe probably 20 feet high, and had the governor and other speakers and the big microphones up on that, and down in the fields down below with the 2 armies fighting. And they had, of course, they had muskets and fired off muskets with blanks in them, and folks falling down, and I thought sure they'd killed them all. I was 4 years old.
Oh, you're 4 then. Okay. Wow.
The very next year, they closed the dam in Sacandaga Reservoir, building. And he took me to that because he was supervisor, and Washington County was involved.
Huh.
And I remember going up there out on the big earthen dam, and they had closed it maybe several weeks before the ceremony, and the water was beginning to fill up the valley. And there was a huge crowd of people. And so that was 2 things that. And the other one, there is a third one. He took me to the Cambridge Fair when the fair was in Cambridge.
Yeah.
When when I was about 4 or 5 years old. So those are two things I really remember about my grandfather.
You got there, how? By a buggy?
But,
On a buggy?
yeah,
Horse and buggy? Yeah. How long did it
when
take
we
you
went
to
to,
get? Yeah.
he had a car where we went to Sacandaga,
Oh, okay.
but he drove his team to the Cambridge Fairgrounds.
How long did it take you from here?
A couple hours.
Really?
Yeah, but I remember it because they had of course they had a lot of buildings there at the time, but they also had a long wooden fence where you tied up your team of horses, and it was just full of wagons and buggies and horses tied up to the fence.
That's funny you said that because I was just thinking, I said, what do you do with your horse when you get there, you know? It's like, okay.
Yeah,
Answers that
they had
question.
and they had rings in the fence
Mm-hmm.
every 10 feet or so.
Mm-hmm.
Huh, wow. You remember what you saw at the fair?
Yeah, I remember one thing in particular. And I've seen it on television a couple times since. They had a tank about 10 feet of water and diving horses where they walked them up a long incline,
Yeah.
30 feet up and 50 feet up, with a white horse, man on his back, jump off into the water.
Huh.
That's something.
Yeah, that's what I remember. That fascinated me.
Yeah.
Do you remember if the McMorris family ever had get-togethers? You know, all the brothers and sisters and all that.
Tom, there was some connection with the MacArthurs. You got any?
Haven't
When
seen
I
you
was
about
small,
that.
we didn't have McGeoch. Well, yes, we had the McGeoch picnic once too, but
Yeah.
had a MacArthur picnic that we all went to.
Sounds familiar.
And over in Bald Mountain, the farm that Jay's renting over there now in Bald Mountain, he rents it on the flats, was the MacArthur farm. We went there twice. The MacArthurs were living there for a summer picnic.
Mhm.
And once down on South Union Street, down maybe 3 or 4 miles out of town, going down by McGeoch,
Yep.
before it comes out onto Route 22 again. The MacArthur family lived down there. And I don't know what the connection of the MacArthurs were, but they're related.
I had a teacher, Mrs. MacArthur, in elementary or something.
But picnics were a big thing back then. You had the McGeoch picnic, you had the town picnic. Most of them were at the lake, Hedges Lake.
Yeah.
And that was when small boys remember those picnics. Whereas nobody had swimming pools, so everybody that wanted to go swimming met her husband there, married and stayed right close to Cobuskill on a farm. And of course Bill came back on the farm. And Art worked for us on the farm while he was going up at summers when he was still in high school.
Yeah.
And Harold did some too. They just had more help on there than they needed.
But what do you remember anything specific about my grandfather, William John?
Well, of course, they all came to East Greenwich Church,
Okay, yeah.
and we had a lot of activity in the church back then.
I thought I'd heard that he their family, before they bought this farm, that he ran the store in East Greenwich or something maybe, or he worked on. He ran the farm.
Worked in the store in East Greenwich.
Did he run that farm too at a certain time maybe?
He might have.
Because I guess it sounds like.
After my grandfather moved back up here,
Yeah.
Your father, his brother, might have taken over.
Yeah.
But I don't remember, but I remember telling about him working in Blanchard's store. But at that time it was Ashton. Archie Ashton owned that store.
That the one in East Greenwich?
Yeah.
It was there. Yeah.
And he worked and your father worked for him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
I don't
remember
know.
anything else about him as far as my grandfather? As far as okay, he worked there, maybe in the store. At least my father worked there, and then they had the farm here.
Yeah.
See, because he died before I was born.
Yeah.
So I don't remember him at all. So,
I don't remember. As long as I knew him
yeah.
personally, he was living on the farm.
Yeah. Okay.
What kind of guy was he? Like happy, hardworking guy?
Oh yeah. Well, the size family he had to be.
Yeah.
Good
Yeah.
point.
He had 7 kids. That's for sure.
Yeah.
What about Nellie Millington?
Grandma. Yeah.
Yeah.
She was a Millington.
Yeah.
The Millingtons, it must have been her father was a doctor in Greenwich,
Okay.
and his widow was quite an accomplished piano player. And after Dr. Millington died, she came and lived with my grandfather and grandmother over on the farm, and gave music lessons to quite a few of the young people in the area. In fact, I took music lessons from her, but it didn't take. But that's how I knew her. She was a lady that weighed about 100 pounds. And the thing I remember, she always wore a thing around her neck with a big brooch on it and a lot of lace and stuff. She really always dressed up. Never, you'd think she was going to town every time you saw her. She wouldn't get up in the morning without dressing up good clothes. But she lived with my grandmother and grandfather for maybe
McMorris. Yeah. Yeah.
5 or 6 years anyways.
Yeah. Huh.
And then she married Will.
Her daughter
Ah.
married me.
Oh, okay.
Where did James Thomas and Anna McGeoch live? They lived over here on the farm over in Jackson.
Mm-hmm.
And he was a farmer.
Yep.
That was it. And do you know what the other kids went into? I know there was a carriage shop. Somebody had a carriage shop that was in McMorris over on William Street in town, in Salem. Yeah. And I'm not sure which, I'm assuming it might have been one of the brothers from this bunch, maybe. But I don't know
Yeah.
whether
It would be before your father and his generation.
Oh, yeah.
Before that, yeah.
Yeah, it was
And
back.
maybe that's the one we didn't know so much about. Moved to Salem, that was out of the area.
Thomas Hebert.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it very well could have been
Well,
him.
what about? Now you're saying Alexander? He was over in Casiuna,
Alec.
Argyle. Alec.
ALEC.
Yeah.
He was over Casiuna.
Okay.
And Anna married McGuire, who came from Argyle.
Okay, that's the connection there. Yep.
And he took a job in a grocery store that I don't know who owned it in Cambridge, and eventually bought it and was in the grocery business. And his son followed him in the grocery business.
Bob.
Yeah, Bob.
And then my father worked for him
Yeah.
for a long time.
Everybody worked for him. Everybody in he employed McMorris if they were available. Ed worked for your father worked for him for a long time
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
Bob.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And then he ran the store after Bob died.
Yep. He talked about buying it, but he didn't want to commit to the.
Yeah.
He knew what it would take because he was doing it anyway. You know.
Well, Bob had the grocery store on the other corner from where it is now. He had the first freezer lockers when frozen food come in. Of course, people out in the country didn't have freezers.
Right.
So when you butchered a hog or beef or anything, you took it in there and Bob packaged it up and put it in a freezer locker. He had maybe 50 freezer lockers that you rented.
Did you ever see those metal lockers that were down along the Battenkill in the garage there? They're about this wide and about this deep and about that high, and they had a key.
Yeah.
It was like a mailbox at the post office. It was big, and that was what that was your section in the freezer. Because you didn't have a freezer at home.
Okay, so
And
they
you're,
get from there.
you're lucky if you had you had a refrigerator at home with ice in the
Right.
refrigerator.
Yeah.
But so you went down once a week and got frozen food.
Never knew that.
Yeah.
That was right on the corner there where the Chinese restaurant is now.
Oh, okay.
Across
The
from
big
store.
brick building.
Yep.
And when your father, I remember when Bob built the new store. I mean, here was a man, 70 years old. He said, "He must be crazy spending all that money at his age." Turned out all right.
Yeah, that was a big business there.
Yeah,
Still is actually, but yeah, that was.
but I can just remember Bob's father used to come down from Argyle and visit, but I was pretty. It must have been when we had a family picnic or reunion or whatever.
Right.
He'd come because he never lived in Cambridge. He just lived in Argyle. But I remember Bob having his father there.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, we're back to the beard age. They all had beards then.
Yeah.
And now they're all having them again.
Yeah. And Bob and his wife May lived over top of the freezer plant.
Yeah.
Okay.
They had an apartment over in that building upstairs there.
Huh.
So he was over that, and then he could look over at the store and keep an eye on the store too.
Back to my grandfather. He died. I think he was only 66 or 67. And he had, if they'd had heart bypasses done, he'd lived a lot longer, but he had heart attack. And what the family always said contributed to it, the farm over there, the cropland was all down next to the main road. On both sides of the road, there was some fairly flat fields. Behind the barn was a steep hill. Still is, of course, but a long ways up, and really steep. It had a lane up there that the cows went up, and up on top there were some pasture fields. A couple fields he did raise the crops on, but not very often. And so all his life as farming, he had to climb that hill to get the cows, bring them down for milking. And I know my father and mother always said that contributed to his dying young. It's just his heart couldn't stand it. It was the only other thing I remember. I've got a rifle down here in my museum that was my grandfather's. And of course, then my father had a 38 caliber single shot rifle. And the only time I remember my father shooting it was when Grandpa McMorris' horse broke a leg and Dad went over and shot the horse. Get taken out of its misery. That's the only time I remember using it. That brings up another story, but about here. The rifle ended up with my father's brother in Baltimore. And with him, ended up with his son in Florida. And then his grandson in Florida. And his grandson in Florida was up here, stopped a couple times, went through the museum. And he says, "You know, I got something you ought to have." And he sent me the rifle. Had to set it, had to take it all apart in parts and put it back together, set it UPS. So I've got the rifle. It was patented in 1854, made by Stevens Company in Connecticut.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was always trying to find out more information about it. It's in perfect shape. Here about 2 months ago, in one of my antique magazines, here's a picture of the rifle. And the second page, identical. Sold at a gun auction out in Colorado, I think it was, for $18,500. Identical rifle,
Wow.
except for one thing. The one in the picture had Buffalo Bill insignia on it. That was $10,000 worth.
Yeah. That'd make a little difference, yeah.
Yeah, he'd given it as a gift
Yeah.
to somebody.
Wow.
But it's the identical rifle.
Right.
So I found out a little bit more about the rifle anyways.
Do you know anything, in going back through the McGeoch book and different things?
To the what?
The McGeoch book,
Yeah, I got all the McGeoch books.
Oh, I got, yeah.
You had to.
Yeah. This summer, Gene and I were out in the western part of the state. So we went through and found Armstrong's McMorris's, he was the elder McMorris to come over, but his son, he was always in Courtright, and we found his grave out there. So that was good, because Dolores had told me about that, too. But we found then, but here, his son, James, interesting, they don't have a middle name for him. Everybody else has got the middle names, but except for that James, who married Isabel Law, who's buried in Revolutionary War Cemetery.
Yeah. She's from over here outside of Cambridge.
On 313.
Yeah. 313, yeah.
Yeah. And then his son, Thomas, married Elizabeth MacArthur.
That's where the MacArthurs
That's where the MacArthurs come in. And then their son was James T. and Anna, great-grandfather. Yeah.
They
So
used,
it's three levels there.
they used all those names pretty regularly,
boy.
didn't they?
There's so many Thomases and, James
Alexanders
and Thomas,
and-
oh my gosh.
Uncle Alec over there in on the South Arkansas Road, was he the oldest of the family?
I don't know. He was,
I always thought he was. I didn't know.
we'd have to look in the McGeoch book for that
Yeah, I
probably.
could verify
Because he
that.
should be, so, Alec.
I know he's older than my
He looks
grandfather.
older. He's got the mustache. So he looks like like you look at my grandfather, I was thinking he probably 16
Right.
in that picture maybe.
Anna looks about 15 down there in the front row. Handsome people, weren't they?
Mary.
Pretty smartly dressed.
Yeah, they sure were. When they got their picture taken back there, you got dressed up.
Heck yeah. That was an event.
Yeah.
He was born in 1866.
Who Alec was?
Yeah. And Mary was 68.
That was Mary Richards.
Yeah. And Thomas was 1870. And James Houston was 1873. So where does that put our
Yeah, well,
66? So yeah, he's
Alec
the
was the
older.
oldest, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Hmm.
And then my grandfather was 76.
He was the youngest.
18, yeah, must have been.
Or was Anna the youngest?
She looks younger than him in
Yeah,
that photo.
Anna,
Did you tell about Anna in there?
James. Yes, Anna, 79.
Yeah, she was the youngest.
Yeah, so she's 3 years younger
Yeah.
than my grandfather.
Yeah.
Yeah, she married John McWhorter, and then they had Bob McWhorter. So, yeah.
Huh.
Yeah.
Bob was my father's
Boss.
cousin. Yeah.
And John McWhorter, Anna was a widow for quite a long time, so I'm not sure what happened to John, what he died of her. But I don't remember. I just remember him once, and I was very small, and I think I knew Anna a long time after that, so
Right.
lived down there on South Union Street.
So Miller opened a appliance store.
Oh, before that, he peddled belt and sail.
Oh, he did this. Well, that was in the family, right?
Yeah, Bob Thompson had the farm out there going towards the cemetery farm.
Yep.
He peddled belt and sail. Miller went to work for him. And when Bob stopped peddling milk, Miller took it over and put of course you had raw milk then, didn't have pasteurizer, but he had all the bottling equipment and stuff in his garage out there.
Now, where were you talking about? Where did he have this?
On Archibald Street, right where the house, where the printer washed away there a few years back with the,
Oh, right there.
yep.
Okay.
At that barn out behind there was his
So that's where
milk plant.
that's where Miller was. Okay. Because remember
That's
where
where
Bob,
Miller lived.
you know where Bob Thompson's is the farm going out of the village on the left. Okay. Yep. Yep.
That's where Miller lived, there on
Okay.
Archibald Street.
Yep.
And Jimmy, after he got out of Morrisville, went to work at Marcy Insane Asylum outside of Whitesboro, outside of Utica. A big dairy farm there, and he went to work on the farm. As well, they were hiring Morrisville graduates for managers and so on and so on. While he was there, he worked there a couple years. That's where he met his wife. She went to Morrisville too, but she lived from Whitesboro.
Helen.
I think that's probably why he took the job out there. And anyways, he got quite a good reputation for being able to handle insane people, because at that time they had ones that were halfway normal were working on the farm, and he was in charge of the crew. He got such a good recommendation that he got offered a much better job at Brentwood on Long Island. They had a farm down there too, but he was always in charge of a crew of workable, insane people that were in the asylum. But, and so in I'm guessing a little bit, Tom, but I'd say he graduated Morrisville 31, along about 1937 or 8. The Parker farm came up for sale, and Miller bought it.
Up in Granville.
No, right there behind the courthouse.
Oh, that was Parker's
Same.
farm.
Oh,
Okay. I didn't never know it by that. So.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was Congressman Parker lived in the mansion that they tore down to build a school.
Okay.
And his farm was not only the land out where the football field is and beyond, that was part of the farm, but the buildings were all behind the courthouse across the bridge.
Right.
Still there.
Right.
And so Miller bought that, and Jim went to work for him. He persuaded him to come back up and work for him.
Where did Miller get his milk from, though? Until that time, still got it from Thompson.
Before that,
Yeah.
he bought it from the same farm out to, what's his name on?
Bob Thompson.
Bob Thompson's
Okay.
farm.
All right.
Then he bought his own farm, and had his own cows.
Yeah.
And so he hired Jim to work on the farm. They didn't get along very well. So let's see, I was in Morrisville in 1940. Jim there was a district attorney out in Madison County that owned 3 farms, and he hired Jim to manage the 3 farms. So he was doing that while I was in college. Then he came
Madison
back.
County is out near Morrisville.
Yeah,
Okay.
right there, right near Morrisville.
All right.
There were big dairy farms. Then the 3 farms had probably 50, 60 cows in each farm, and this district attorney owned them. and hired Jim as the manager. I think I remember I was a freshman when he moved out there, and he was there while I was a senior. Not very long after that. I don't think he was there 3 or 4 years.
Yeah.
And he come back and worked for Miller again, and he started peddling milk. Then Miller sold the farm to Sheldon's.
Yeah.
At an auction. Well, in the meantime, Miller bought Star Motors. He's where he had the hardware store, where the bank, it was right up by the hotel.
Town offices.
Yeah.
Called Star, and he sold automobiles.
All right, that's what he sold first, huh?
And it was called Star Motors.
Mm-hmm.
It was kind of two interesting things. This was 1946. Televisions were just beginning to be advertised. He had a big sign in the window. See your first television here in this window. He sold Motorola
Okay.
radios. Watch this window for your first television. My son Rick was born in Cambridge Hospital on the 9th of September. And at the same time, a fellow named Pratt had a son born in the hospital the same week. He lived in a Greenwich family. He was a victim of infantile paralysis, was a little bit quite lame, and he was only maybe 30 years old. But he was working for a company that sold radios and televisions in Troy.
Mm-hmm.
In the hospital was a man that had been, I don't know what his problem was, he'd been a resident in the hospital for the time the hospital opened. He was a great baseball fan. He was an invalid, but not bedridden all the time, but he's in a wheelchair. He's a great baseball fan. When they found out that this Pratt was working for a company that sold television sets in Troy, the people in the hospital asked him if he could bring a television set up and see if they could get a picture so that this guy could see the baseball game. So I was there, and he brought the television up, 7-inch Motorola television, and you couldn't get a picture because there's so much metal in the hospital, couldn't get a picture. While he was there, I said, before you go home with that, bring it up on my farm on the hill and see if you can get a picture up there. Okay. So we did, and set up the aerial out here on a pole in the dooryard. Got a picture. So he'd just taken this 7-inch in tray for a barn grill in Troy that bought a 10-inch one. And so I bought this RCA, $360 I paid for it. 7-inch picture.
Oh my gosh.
And had a table right there. Sat on the table and I called up Uncle Miller. This was a bad mistake. I called up Miller and says, come on down and watch television. He didn't speak to me for about a month. I'm serious. He was really upset. But he got over it anyways. But goodness, we had half a dozen people, at least half a dozen every Friday night watching the fights on Friday night. Didn't have any television except television come on. All I had was the signal on there all day long. About 5 o'clock, we'd come on with local programs. Never forget it.
So he had a sign in the window saying,
Yeah.
Look, so why? He had a TV in there in the window? Or
He didn't have one yet.
he never got one yet?
Never-
You
no,
beat him to it?
He didn't get one till after I got.
Oh, jeez.
He was. When I called him up and told him, I asked him. I wasn't doing it. I just said, Uncle Miller, I got a television set. Come on down and watch it. Jeez. He didn't like that at all.
So he sold, where the town office is now?
Then he sold
that was
Kaiser
automobiles.
Fraser cars.
Okay.
And I bought Kaiser Fraser, it was a shipbuilder. They built Kaiser Frasers on the West Coast. Established dealerships. He got the dealership. But I had a 48 Kaiser. That was the cheaper one. Fraser was the deluxe model.
Okay.
So then they went out of business, so then he just went into more TVs and stuff? Is that what happened?
He went on selling refrigerators and appliances and stuff. Yeah.
Because my father-in-law, Leon Conity,
Yeah.
I guess worked for him for
Yeah, then
a
he
while.
ended up taking over the milk business.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I put in a milk plant down here because Jimmy said they were buying their milk then. After he sold the farm, they bought their milk from already bottled in Granville. And driving up there every day and getting it. And they're probably selling 400 quarts a day. And so Jimmy says, you buy Marshall's Dairy in Greenwich, and I'll buy my milk from you, because you're closer to go to Granville after. And so that's what happened. I built the milk plant. Timing, everything was all right except the timing was totally wrong. 2 years after I bought it, they almost overnight, like in home delivery and glass bottles. So everything went to paper. The store business, yeah, we'll keep buying from them. We want a contract. We've got 10 stores. We want a contract, get it all at the same place. Couldn't do it. And so we lost the store business to paper. And then house delivery gradually, and glass bottles went out of business.
Right.
So I, for about a year, I bought my stuff all bottled in paper from a Horizon company down the Catskills, delivered it there 3 times a week. And I said, this is nuts. I quit. So.
Yeah, that's crazy.
But that's where Salem got their milk from me for 5-6 years.
So that was, you had a milk plant in Greenwich, you said?
No, right here on the farm.
Oh,
He
oh,
bought,
right here.
He bought
Right
the one
down
that
on the
was in
farm,
Greenwich
right.
and brought it over.
Okay.
Because somebody was going out of business. Marshall, you said,
Yeah,
was going out of business in Greenwich, and so you bought their equipment and put it in here.
yep.
Okay.
Moved up and built a milk plant.
Okay. No kidding.
And that's where Leon used to get his milk.
That's one of the
over here.
expensive educations I had.
Tell me about your early education. Where'd you go to school? Where'd you start school?
I went to this district school up here 4 years. I took 2nd and 3rd grade the same year, so I was in 5th grade the 5th year. I was in 6th grade, went to Cambridge to school. We contracted with Cambridge. Salem didn't have room for them anyways. And so we contracted with the district, went to Cambridge. There was only 5 of us in school. I was the head of my class the whole 5 years, only one in it. And so then Salem centralized. And when they centralized, our district went into that Salem Central District. So my senior year, I went to Salem to school in the old school. The new one wasn't quite completed yet.
On West Broadway.
On West Broadway.
Yep.
I went there 1 year. 26 in the graduating class, and because the new school, the next year, about 10 of us decided we'd take a postgraduate course so we could go to the new building. Well, I took it not only that, so I could play basketball too. And so my postgraduate year, I went to the new school building. And after that, I went to Morrisville. Graduated there in 42.
And what was your degree in there at Morrisville?
I what?
What was your degree? What did you get a degree in at Morrisville?
Rural engineering.
Oh.
That covered a lot of territory. And I played football, basketball, baseball at Morrisville. I played football, basketball, baseball my PG year in Salem and cross country and track. So I got 5 letters that year.
What caused all you guys to go to college? Because that was kind of a big deal back in the day, wasn't it?
Probably I went for. A lot of people were going to Cobleskill, which was closer by.
Right.
But Jimmy went to Morrisville, so that's why I went to Morrisville. And plus the fact that Morrisville played football and Cobleskill didn't.
So what's this book?
I got an invitation to, when I graduated from Morrisville, I got an invitation to come to Philadelphia Eagles.
Try out. Wow.
I knew better than to go.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
So, but here's the.
Yeah.
There's 2 basketball teams I played on at Morrisville.
The Regulars and Tucker's Terrors.
Yeah.
You're the tall guy in the back?
And there's when I played basketball, semi-pro, in Washington County Semi-Pro League.
Oh, wow.
Did that for 10 years or so.
Okay. Wow. What was the name of the team?
Well, when it started out as Salem Cambridge Greenwich together, and they called it the Tri-County All-Stars.
Okay.
And it included teams from Saratoga and Warren County. We played in Glens Falls, we played up far north as Bolton Landing.
Mm-hmm.
Bolton Landing and Lake George had a team. And it was started during the war, and the last 5 years it picked up, became a lot better because veterans are coming home and got some better ball players.
Yeah.
Than just farm kids. Our families, mother Jennet McMorris lived on a farm only 1 mile away. Married dad in 1921. She had grown up in East Greenwich 2 miles away, where her father owned a small farm and ran a feed store. They moved to the farm near my father's in 1912. After graduating from Greenwich High School, mother went to Oneonta Normal School and became a teacher. She taught in several area one-room school houses, including Scotch Hill, which is halfway between her family farm and my dad's family farm.
So that's considered to be the Scotch Hill School up here?
Yep.
Oh, okay.
Clarence Ray went to school to her.
Yeah.
So
Huh.